Hi and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is Wednesday, June 1st, 2016. I like tonight's webinar because I think it gives us a cross-section of many ideas or tools that we talk about at Evoke. And so while it is in itself is its own model, it also is something that can help us to make connections between some of the various things that we ask you all to learn and to practice and to know. So with that, I'll get right into it. I'm going to talk a little about what therapy is and what it's not. And I think that this idea that I've been talking about lately on our clinical teams and in my trainings, I think it comes from parenting education, and also it can inform parenting education. When I think about therapy and what it is, I think about it as learning how to feel. And by that I mean decreasing the symptomology. Symptomology can be understood simply as our feelings coming out sideways, the expression of unfelt emotions. And so if we can learn to feel, and if we can have tools that provide us an outlet for our feeling, then we don't need the symptomology. That's a very simple way to look at it. And of course, there's many more variables than that, and there's specific aspects to that we could enlarge, but that's a very general way of thinking about it. And when I think about therapy, I don't think about it in terms of advice giving or lecturing, right? That's not the talent in therapy. Anybody can do that. Any layperson, any parent can do that. Even many therapists think about it in terms of providing you with information and teaching you. Doing webinars is not therapy, right? It's something very different than that. Therapy is holding. It's containing somebody. So when somebody shows up at my office, neurotic or anxious or depressed, addicted, in denial, whatever it is, it's my job to understand and find them in that. To write a story for myself. Maybe even offering it back to them or offering it to the parents. To write a story where those symptoms make sense. They fit into the story. And when I can do that, when I can engage in that enterprise with my clients, I'm not frustrated or disappointed or anxious for them to change. However, in doing that and writing that story and presenting it back to them, they can oftentimes find their way out of it, find their way into a more authentic, whole version of themselves. And so this idea of containing is to hold them, to see them, to have it make sense. Containing is being gentle with them. It's not punching them in the nose, their symptoms in the nose, or punching their defenses in the nose. It's understanding the defense and what it tells us. And my reaction to a client, my frustration, disappointment, anxiety with a client, oftentimes can inform me. I was training a therapist recently, and I was talking about some of her countertransference responses to her client, her getting frustrated with them. And she came back to me the next day. She said, I felt guilty about that. I felt guilty that I was having those feelings in countertransference. And my response to her was, we all do. We all fall into that at times, right? And we want to come out and lecture and teach and change the person. And so it's not a shameful enterprise. In fact, it's diagnostic. It can tell you something about them. It can tell you something about their background and the context that they came from often. So we use our countertransference, we use our reaction, our being triggered by a client to inform us about them, right? It tells us something about them. We can get to the point after we contain, after we hold them, where we can repair limiting beliefs that they have about themselves. And that's really what the awareness wheel can do for us as therapists and can do for you as parents, is how do we get to that place where we begin to address the limiting beliefs, this part of their story that is not true, that they have bought into. The idea is that we've been all sold a story, parts of ourselves, ideas about ourselves that we buy into and that we're living it. We're living it out, right? I have beliefs about my body. I have beliefs about my capacity, my goodness, right? And I spend my life trying to fight my way out of that story. And therapy can help us to let go of it. It can challenge the original messages of our story. Most parents and students that I work with, clients that I work with, I say to them, that's not your voice that I'm hearing right now. That shame, that guilt, that fear, that you're not going to be okay, that it's not going to be okay. That's not your voice. That got told to you somewhere. And so if we can identify that as a foreigner, if you will, inside of your head, we can learn to let it go. One of the ways to see one's context is to get outside of it. You can do that by traveling. You can do that by going to therapy. There's a classic old story that I retell to illustrate this about a young married couple where the wife in this story was cooking a roast in one of their first few days of marriage. And she cut the ends off it, and her husband complained about that. And she said, that's just how my mother did it. And then he asked the mother, and she said, that's just how my mother did it. And he asked the grandmother. And she said, when I was raising a family, my oven was too small and the pan was too small, so I had to cut the ends of the roast off it. And that's just a simple, silly example of how generational ideas, generational stories, generational trauma can be passed down. And if we can't have a different experience, we can't see it. The fish is the last one to discover water. Right? And so when I was just talking to a potential client today who was apologizing for bothering me, which doesn't make sense on a few levels. And what I said to this client was, I said, you don't have to take care of me. I can take care of myself. I can manage that myself. And we talked about it and we had some chuckles about it. But the interesting thing about it is this client couldn't imagine a relationship that he or she didn't have to take care of. Couldn't imagine it. And it will take a lot of experiences for this individual to believe something different. So having a new context, having a new experience in therapy, we can begin to challenge the things that we've bought, the things that we're assuming are true about ourselves and the world. We start off by holding or containing the other, right? Honoring the defense, and we offer them a new experience, and then we offer them new ideas. We say, I have a different idea. I have a new thought about it. What if it was like this? Here's my fantasy. What if it could be like this? And so we began to challenge the ideas, and there are a lot of different interventions to do that, to challenge somebody's belief. Many models in therapy see the belief as the point of entry into the intervention, right? We can't challenge all the rest. We can't challenge the sensory data. This is the awareness wheel. We can't challenge what happened. Feelings are so unconscious and such the result of our thoughts and beliefs that we can't challenge the feelings. They just are what they are. And the desires come out of that and the behaviors come out of that. But an area that we can challenge and intervene at is the thoughts. But slowly. I can't emphasize this enough. Very, very slowly. Most people, most inexperienced therapists do it too much and too quickly. They're not patient enough. Their countertransference, if you will, their idea that we need to get there quicker gets in the way of all the other things that I've just mentioned. That's why I mentioned that stuff earlier. Because without all that stuff, it's not therapy. It's just people talking to people. Right? It's just people giving advice and being experts at life with other people. So this model, the awareness wheel, is a model where we begin to see the different parts of ourselves. There's the stuff the observations that we have about our environment, the beliefs that we have that develop over time as we have these experiences over. If I am abused by my father physically, which I was not, but if I was abused by my father physically, then over time I come to believe that men aren't safe, that I don't matter, that I deserve it, all those kinds of ideas. And then my subsequent interactions with people and with the world are going to be run through that filter, that broken filter. And then I'm going to have feelings because of that. And then I'm going to act on those feelings in my relationships with others and in my own life. So that's the cycle that we look at. So I'm going to go through these step by step and talk about how they fit together and what, like I said earlier, what's the cross section? What's the fit with the other ideas that we teach at Evoke? First of all, as a scientist, as a social scientist, we were taught how to observe things. And it's an amazingly simple exercise. they would have us behind a one-way mirror, and we would be watching preschool children, because at our university there was a preschool. That was part of the deal. It was very inexpensive, but we ran social science experiments, harmless ones, like this there. So we would watch, and we would have to describe one particular child for 10 minutes. And then we would hand that in to the professor. And then he or she would mark it all up with red, because we weren't observing. It wasn't objective. We were saying things like, and then he got frustrated. And we learned to say things like, and then he furrowed his brow and slammed his hand on the desk. And so we learned as scientists to split apart our observations with our interpretations of those observations. So the observations are just what happens. It's our beliefs that cloud them often, but our observations are what happens to us. So we develop observation capacities in therapy. We start to recognize the trauma responses. Some of you have heard that phrase, that term trauma response before. A trauma response is an unquestioned, unfiltered, knee-jerk reaction to something. We all have some of those, where you fly off the handle, where you can go from 0 to 60, right? There are things that trigger you. Those are, and the more it is, the more chronic it is, the more severe it is, the more unprocessed trauma one has. So we start to recognize that our inflexible, just instinctual reactions to things have their connection back to early life trauma in our lives, and trauma in general in our lives. Part of what we do, this happens through the I feel statement. That's a practice. A big part of this is the practice. It's the I feel. When is the sensory, because I think is the thought, what I hope for myself and I hope for others is the wishes, the wants, right? So we begin to differentiate events from our interpretations of events. One of the most harmful things in our lives is when we have a rigid interpretation of events, and we can't separate out events from our interpretation. If every time somebody raises a voice at me, I perceive that to mean that they don't care about me, or that the world's not safe, or whatever it is, that's going to be a problem. And if I can't learn to see my construct, my idea, as a relative truth, if I can't own it as mine, not a truth about the world, but just a truth that I've bought into and subscribed to, if I can't see that, I'm going to be in problems in relationships. I'm going to miss you. I'm going to be less flexible in my responses. So we start to pull apart the sensory data from our thoughts or interpretation of it. And then we develop response flexibility, right? I can then react without the knee-jerk response. I can then take time to process it and to come to a decision about it and about what I'm going to do with it that is slow and filtered. And that's part of what happens in therapy for all of you. Is we learn to develop a capacity to respond flexibly. And we have to explore our own trauma to do that. Right? It takes work, and it takes time, and it takes oftentimes having a new experience. So let's go around the cycle, and then we get to the thoughts. I've said a lot about these already, but these are our beliefs. These are embedded in us, if you will, from the roles and rules, the often unspoken roles and rules. It's oftentimes those unspoken, those covert rules that are more insidious, because we can't name them. They weren't stored in our brains verbally, right? When nobody said in my family, anger is not okay, anger is dangerous. Nobody said that ever in my family. But people were uncomfortable with it. They were afraid of it. They tried to get me not to feel it. And so then my ability to deal with my own anger and to be in conflict and not be terrified by it would be challenged by that, right? If somebody said to me, anger's bad, and that was a constant overt message in my life, that would be much easier to challenge and much easier to see how it affects me. So it's those unspoken things. That's why so much of what we teach you all in listening to your children and not trying to justify, talk them out of it, dismiss it, erase it, make it better, and the list goes on. because we're saying that's a way of saying to your child that not to feel, which is the opposite of the enterprise of therapy, of teaching them to feel. So we're giving you tools to help them understand what's going on inside of their head and to get out of it. So it's these unexamined thoughts that become the most dangerous ones in our head. In the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, he talks about these as agreements. The four agreements that we've accepted to be true. And then he spends the rest of the book challenging them. And I've done a webinar on that. We develop, like I said, a rigidity. I love what a woman said recently at one of our intensives when she said, the moment that I realized that one of the long-held truths that I had wasn't true, it scared me because everything else was up for grabs. And that's what happens at Evoke for parents and for children, is that once one long-held belief is shown to be not necessarily true, then everything is up for grabs, and that's scary because then we don't have guardrails, if you will, anymore. And so we do this gently with you. We do this gently with them. Sometimes I speak in metaphors. One of the benefits of doing webinars versus therapy is I'm speaking to a large general audience, right? So you can chew on it or reject it. You can assume that I'm talking about somebody else. So part of what I'm challenging at times on some of these webinars is those thoughts and those beliefs that you have. I'm giving you another idea about it to consider as a possibility. You know, a lot of the difficulty is we see things in black and white and binary, right? And instead of a dialectical way, which means that it can be true that I both love you and I'm mad at you. It can be true that I treat you poorly sometimes and I respect you. And it's hard for us to see and hold two seemingly opposite things at the same time. And so sometimes therapy helps us to hold on to things, to see the gray area, to see the both and instead of the either or in our lives. And that binary, that black and white, that rigid thinking, either or thinking, can be absolutely a part of a lot of psychological issues. Personality disorders like bipolar and borderline and narcissism are riddled, addiction, are riddled with black and white binary thinking. Let's get to the feelings part of it. I want to be just because you say I feel doesn't mean you're sharing a feeling. I can say I feel that you're not being nice to me. I feel that this is wrong. I feel like I don't fit in. Those aren't emotions. We're talking about emotions, one word. And we know what those are, right? Happy, sad, mad, glad, scared, and so on. And we can get more complex and diverse and subtle in our distinction about our feelings, but they're one-word emotions. It's I feel and then one word. Anytime you say I feel like or I feel that, you're talking about a thought. So we start to understand the emotion, the feeling, which really is the fuel toward our behavior, right? It's the energy behind our behavior. It's what leads us to do what we're doing. And it comes from our interpretations or beliefs about the events that occur to us in our life. They're yours. And it takes a long time to own them. You don't choose your feelings. But you can learn to feel differently by challenging the beliefs, by opening up your mind. And that takes a long time. If I was abused by my father, I can learn to trust men. By exposing myself to it, by taking small steps, and I can own it. If somebody goes to pat my hand, me on the shoulder, and they're men, and I jerk away in fear, they didn't cause me to feel scared. I own that. It's mine. And with a lot of therapy, I can get over that. So feelings are yours to own. They won't kill you. They feel like they will. The thing that will kill you is trying not to feel them and trying to control them. That's what kills us, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. When we can learn to feel and go through them and have them go through us, we can move past them. We can learn to feel more and more clearly. I'm better at feeling now than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm better at identifying it. I'm better in a lot of ways at tolerating it. I have more of a capacity to feel uncomfortable than I did when I was 16, when I was 25. So it's like a muscle that we can exercise. And therapy is that place where we learn to feel. We develop and work out that muscle. We talk about it in therapy. We talk about how we feel. We talk about it over and over again. We're challenged. That knee-jerk sarcastic reaction at dinner time out in the field results in a group where the staff are asking the student or the client, how do you feel? And the student dismisses it by saying something like, nothing, it was no big deal. And we don't go away. We continue to ask about that. And we're teaching them how to feel. And then we're asking them, could you do that a different way? Could you respond to that feeling a different way? What led to that feeling? What did you believe about that situation? So we pull all of that apart and we teach them how to feel. Your feelings are going to be expressed one way or the other. They're either going to come out sideways, symptomatically, right? Carl Jung said that neuroses is a substitute form of legitimate suffering. Another way of saying that our neurotic behaviors, our mental health symptoms, are just a substitute for authentically going through the feeling. So they're going to be expressed one way or the other. That's why I always say, if we can learn to listen to what the behavior is telling us, if we can stop first, don't go into trying to change the behavior, but pause and give it a voice and help them work it out. Then when we do behavior modification, we're not just pushing it underground so that it pops up somewhere else, but we're actually healing it. The feelings need to be held by yourself and by the other. And that's why, parents, it's so hard for us to experience what I call empathic misery, right? I'm so much better at it with your children than I am with my own children. I have less capacity to sit with my children's pain, right? Because I identify it as something I need to fix. That's what we all do. That's why other people can help our children, sometimes in ways that we can't. That's why my children go to therapy. Because the person helping them is better at it than I am. I can do it with your children really well. I can do it with you well. But it's hard to do it with our family because of the connections that we have to them, the identification we have with them, our intolerance of it. They need to be held by another person. We learn to listen to them before we try to change them. We want to be informed by them. We want them to teach us. There's great wisdom in it. That's why we talk all the time about embracing the journey, that it's more important for them to figure themselves out than to do it right. That's more important. That's the enterprise that we're engaging in when we're trying to help with healthy child development, is figure themselves out. And so the failures and successes become less relevant or important to us. What becomes relevant or important to us is, what are we learning? What are they learning? What are they, they're touching the stove over and over and getting burned. What are they learning in the process? And therapy funnels all that energy out through feeling statements and sharing. That's what we do. Then there's this desires, hopes, and requests. These are more damaging when unspoken. If we can state our desires, our wants, our requests of others, they're less harmful. Not naming them becomes part of the pathology in our relationships, right? If you have an agenda with me and you don't say it, you don't speak it, then you're going to be saying things that are manipulative. What you're saying is not going to be matching what you're meaning, and that's crazy making. I was talking at the parent meeting last night about a parent who was having a phone call. In fact, they're on here this evening. They were having a phone call with their child in aftercare. And there was a certain question that this parent was asking her child. And as we pulled it apart a little bit, we were able to see there might have been some other ideas, another agenda in that. And he could feel it. He can't name it, but he can feel it. And if we can learn to match our words to our meta communication, that is what we really mean and intend, through this work, we have much healthier relationships. So the unspoken, versus the spoken. The more unspoken it is, the less named it is, the more coercive it's likely to be. The meta messages and the hidden agendas are the things that make us crazy in our families. That's why sometimes, you know those strong reactions you have to your family that you explain to your in-laws? Excuse me, you can explain to strangers or your spouse? You say, no, there's enough water under that bridge. I know what she means by that. We've had this conversation for years and years because you're aware of the strings that are attached to the things that are being said to you. I think probably the thing that is most challenging for the non-identified patient, which is you, is to see what you still have control over and to focus on that. If we're thinking about, let's say we're talking about my child's depression or substance use. If I can't identify what I need to do in that, then my codependency is in full control of the situation. So if my son is abusing alcohol, and I can't see what is my thing, what's the thing I need to do in relationship to him and to that, and can I work on that? Can I focus? But most non-identified patients, that is, have a hard time even thinking that there's any work for them to do. That's part of what we try to just introduce, is there's a work. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. It's not that. That's the wrong project to be focused on. But there is a project that is worthy of your attention, and that is you. And if you focus on that project, just focusing on that project of improving your life and letting go of improving their life makes it better for everybody. So we began to learn, like the Serenity Prayer suggests, we learn to see what we can control. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the things I can't change, like other people. The courage to change the things I can, which is myself, and that's really hard, and it does take courage. And because we're so easily distracted, grant me the wisdom to know the difference. And that's something that I think for parents, especially as we get into this cycle or this pattern, this dynamic of the identified patient and how symptomatic they are, that's a really important thing to begin to identify is what is your project. Another piece of this should say actions actually. Another piece of this, the actions piece, is that it's not the behavior. It's not, our behavior doesn't define our health or unhealth. And our children's behavior is not the most important thing. That's the surface level. If we can learn to, like I talk about in my book, if we can learn to follow the trail of crumbs back home. I was dealing with a situation with cutting today with a potential client. And the idea was, I know that's scary. I know it. If it was happening to my child, it would be hard to not react to that with a panic. But it can tell us something. It can tell your child something if we can teach them to listen to it too. And that's a powerful thing. That's a thing that a therapist, an outsider, can help you with, because it's too hard for a parent. It's too hard for me and you as parents. Changing the behavior in your child isn't the solution, and changing your behavior isn't the solution. That's why when people ask me questions about what should I do, what's the right thing to do, I can't answer it. Because you can do anything to try to control somebody. And conversely, if you're not trying to control other people, it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to be the right thing, because you're being authentic. You're focusing on you, focusing on your intent. So behavior isn't the answer when we think about it in terms of other people or ourselves. So what's the take home? The I Feel and the Reflective Listening. That webinar exists, the Healthy Communication webinar. Another book that's great about that is Nonviolent Communication. That really does operationalize the awareness wheel. What is the enterprise of therapy? It's very tempting for us therapists to become sort of agents for the parents, to act on your behalf with the child. We can't do that. That doesn't work. Right? We have to do something different and introduce you to something different. We have to tell you a story where the child's behavior makes sense. We have to tell them a story where their behavior makes sense. And that story informs you and me and then the child. It asks you to do something different, to respond differently than is our gut reaction, our autonomic instinctual reaction. That's the enterprise of therapy. That's why it takes training. And that's why even after we get education, I'm speaking for myself, even after we get education, it takes a long time to begin to practice therapy instead of just advising people and coaching them. Learning to manage our fear and anxiety in the face of dangerous or problematic behavior is a task of ours. I talked about this last night at the parent meeting in Los Angeles. The fear and anxiety that we have tells our children that something is wrong with them. And they're doing things that are worthy of our fear, so don't not feel it. But go somewhere to take care of it. Go to an Al-Anon meeting or a parent support group or Finding You or therapy. Go somewhere. Make that your project. Even tell your child, some of this stuff makes me anxious and I need to go work on it. Now, again, my anxiety and my fear can inform me. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about not feeling it. I'm not talking about the fact that if my child's playing with a knife, that's going to scare me. I'm not talking about that kind of fear. I'm talking about the fear and the anxiety that robs me of my serenity on a chronic and daily basis, that makes me obsess, that leads me to believe and want to control other people, that basically results in me being unhappy, miserable, and not kind, compassionate, and clear with others. So we have to manage that so it doesn't get to that point. Getting clearer about our agenda, our meta messages, and our communication. We do that. And somebody asked me last night, how do you do that? And the answer is, you do it in therapy. You do it with a coach. You do it with somebody, with a sponsor. You have to practice it. It was an amazing meeting last night. We had people with young children. And then we had one set of parents that had a 59-year-old child that they were concerned about. It was amazing because it was all the same stuff. The parent of an 8-year-old was there, or at least one of their children was 8, and a parent of a 59-year-old was there. And we were all sharing and recognizing that it's the same tasks. It's the same thing. It's getting clear. And then we can learn to embrace the journey rather than getting it right. I think as parents, because of our fear and anxiety, because we want our children to be happy, we focus so much on pushing the right buttons and flipping the right levers and engineering things so that they'll get it right. We try to control their esteem, how they feel, the choices they make. And when we do all of that controlling of them, we lose ourselves. And we lose the goal, which is to get them to figure themselves out. So we learn through our own parent education, through our own parent coaching, through our own parenting therapy. We begin to learn to own our serenity and to see it from a big picture. And to see that our children, like us in many cases, are going to go on a circuitous route in their life. That we don't know their truth. We know our truth. We don't have their truth. And they've got to figure it out. And so we see struggles and setbacks as opportunities and as part of the lesson, part of the deal. We radically accept those things because we see their value. We begin to give our suffering and their suffering meaning, right? That's what Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is about, is we give it meaning instead of just judging it as good or bad, wanted or unwanted. We see that it has value in our lives. So that's how this model, the awareness wheel, relates to some other ideas, concepts, principles, and tools that we talk about. Happy to take any live questions. You often talk about making decisions based on our truth. How can we decide sometimes when we don't have the experience? For example, professionals that know the statistics and facts. How do we combine both paradigms and remain true to ourselves? That's a good question. I go to a therapist. I've said this. I've gone to a therapist for 17 years. You go get help from experts. And those experts can give you ideas, can share principles with you. But really, the enterprise is helping you develop the capacity to rediscover your truth. What I do in therapy every week, my therapy every week, is I go there to refine myself, to know my truth, to know myself over and over again. It's a place that I go where I can learn to distinguish between the noise in my head, the other voices, the voices from my childhood, the voices from my culture, the voices from my peers, that I can learn by having somebody help me see the difference between those things and my authentic truth. So we go to Al-Anon, we read books, we watch webinars, we go to support groups, we do all that stuff. That's how we do it. And professionals, I'm a fan of going to professional. I don't even know why I would stop going to therapy. I could always learn and get better, right? So Brad's capacity to know and identify my truth is better now than it was 5 years ago because of the work that I do with professionals. Because frankly, some of the work I do with the people that I treat too. So it's a skill and a practice that professionals can absolutely help you with. And we learn by, I'll say one more thing, you can keep this one there, Michael, but we allow ourselves to be asked difficult questions, to be challenged. And we ask ourselves difficult questions, right? That's how we do it. That's what another person can provide. I don't know how to do it on your own all the time. Books can help, webinars can help, lectures can help. I guess those are other people too, because those are books and lectures and so forth. But I think it's done in concert with somebody else, a sponsor, a mentor, a coach, a therapist, somebody. Why do you think cutting has become such an epidemic with this generation? Is it more common than eating disorder now? I'm trying to understand why she cuts. I just can't wrap my brain. I don't know the statistics right now. I'd have to look it up about its prevalence historically and today. The important thing is that there's a good reason why she does it. As crazy as that is to say, there is. It means something. And it's our job to listen and understand and stay curious. And that's hard to do when our child is being carved into by our child. I said this to a parent earlier today. If you wanted to hurt me, Brad, the most, what would you do? You would hurt my child, one of my children. That's how you would hurt me the most, right? And probably true for most or all of you. That's the best way to hurt me. So if my child is hurting my child, then part of it is they're lashing out at me. I mean, there's 100 different answers to the question about why are they cutting. Some of them do it to distract themselves from the emotional pain because it's easier. Some of them do it because they feel so numb and depressed that they do it to feel something. Some they do it as a sign of anger toward parents unconsciously. Some they're because there's a part of themselves that they hate so much. Right? So there's a lot of reasons, and the thing that we ask you to do and that we try to do is stay curious. We try to protect them from themselves, for sure. That's why you've sent them here. But we also try to stay as curious about it as possible and not let our fear and anxiety blind us so much that we lose that, and we're going to need some help with that. All right. Please go to 6 of these meetings before your child is done. And if your child's already graduated and you haven't gone, please go to 6 of them. Here are some upcoming workshops and intensives. We want every current family to go to the workshops. If you want to do deeper, more personal work with me, come to one of our Finding You workshops, either in Park City, Utah, so you fly to Salt Lake City, or down at the Oasis. I'm going to go to California Northern soon. I'm planning on Toronto also. So I'm looking, and by the way, if you're in an area and you want to, if you have an idea for a meeting, I'm willing to go anywhere where we can have enough people that I can be helpful to. So, but Toronto for sure I'm going to be visiting this summer. California I'm going to be visiting in the next month or so also. New York City we already have scheduled, and Chicago's already scheduled too. Follow us on social media for announcements and information and inspirational stories and pictures. If you want a sober, fun trip for your family or for your young adult, go to our Pursuits page. The book is here. Most of what I talk about in here is also referenced in the book. It's on paperback and also audio. And the next webinar will be Monday, June 6th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and I'm going to talk about co-parenting. So We'll get to that. We'll talk about the challenges when your co-parent is on board, when there's great differences in the way that you co-parent, how you can be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, and not have your issue or the issue of the split become a bigger problem for you. So anyway, I hope these are helpful points of contact for you during the week while your child is with us and even afterward and for the rest of your life as long as you want them. And have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Monday night. Take care. Bye-bye.